Well, joining us now to talk further on intellectual property in South Africa and how it's handled, Andrew Baily, intellectual property manager at the University of Cape Town, and you've seen him already, Ralph van Niekerk, who is a patent attorney at Seidels intellectual property attorneys. Andrew, let's kick off with you there, and from your position at the University of Cape Town, it's a world-class university. It comes up with lots of new things, so clearly there's a job for someone like you. How is this, the new legislation, the new approach that's being proposed and that was discussed there, how is it going to affect a university like UCT?
Good morning. You know, I think the IPR Act, which came in about 2012, you know, has impacted our relationship with various funders. You're not looking only at local funders, but international funders. About 60% of UCT's contract research income actually comes from international funding bodies, like the Gates Foundation. And often they've got very specific intellectual property requirements. They're looking at helping developing countries and need specific access arrangements in terms of the intellectual property. So one's got to navigate it fairly carefully. One needs to make specific application for various sort of exemptions to the National IP Management Office. But I think if properly motivated, you know, these are being granted. We've seen recent changes in terms of guidelines where they've facilitated clinical trials that are directed at TB and HIV and things like that. Important diseases for Africa and South Africa in particular. Very important from a research point of view to participate in these trials, and also for the general public who, you know, if the patients weren't participating in the trials, wouldn't be getting these drugs. So we've seen in those cases that, you know, things have been very reasonably applied. The other thing is also, as has been mentioned in your insert, the exchange control regulations, and it is something that definitely, in terms of contract negotiation, does impact, because you find that typically you've got to have concluded the agreement with the suspensive condition that we will seek Reserve Bank approval. One doesn't know what the outcome will be. It takes about 6 weeks. But again, if properly motivated, I think, you know, we've seen in a number of instances from UCT that Reserve Bank has been quite happy and approved our various IP transactions.
Ralph, I'd like to bring it back to the ordinary citizen and not looking at businesses, but if I'm an entrepreneur and I have a fantastic idea, what process do I need to follow in order to register my idea to make sure that it is in fact my intellectual property?
Thanks. Well, depending on what the idea is, a patent might be the most appropriate way of protecting it. There are also other things like trademarks and registered designs. But assuming that it's something technological, then registering a patent is definitely the right way to go.
And how much are we talking in terms of registration? We do understand that there is a possibility that this will be increasing, but at the moment, how big are the increases that we're talking about?
Well, what we have at the moment, as we said in the insert, is we have a registration system in South Africa. So you just file the application, it gets processed formally, and you get granted a number which is a patent number. In other countries, those applications get examined by scientists who are patent office examiners, and that's why the costs are so much more in foreign jurisdictions. Now, one thing's for sure, a bad examination system is far worse than no examination system at all. So my concern is just that should South Africa move to a full-blown patent examination system, it needs to be done in a way that actually processes these applications, because the worst thing that could happen is if these applications just get stuck in the system and years go by and you have no outcome on the clarity as to whether your patent is going to be granted. I think if we go the examination route, we're looking at an increase of 10, possibly 20-fold in the official costs of examination.
Andrew, let's just get back to the university aspect, which is interesting, and I think the universities have explored different ways of patenting and commercializing their ideas. On the one hand, you have the academic world where you're searching for the knowledge, breaking new ground. On the other hand, you do want to commercialize it where possible. So it's a question of setting up companies separate to the university, that kind of thing. Does our environment in South Africa make it easy for you to commercialize and to benefit from good ideas, or is there still a view that you've got to do it for the good of mankind?
No, I think the opportunities are there where one can certainly have success. I think one of the biggest challenges actually lies in that zone of sort of very early stage funding. So it's actually before your sort of VCs come into play. The Technology Innovation Agency recently launched a seed fund that provides universities with up to 500,000 for a project. And this is, I feel, the most critical gap in the South African innovation landscape. It's where you can mature intellectual property and technologies within a university, which is effectively quite a low-cost environment, and move it to a point where you have a really good fundable sort of proposition and business. What we're doing is forming companies far too early, in my opinion, to just in order that an investor can have equity in that company in return for their investment. What we really need is to develop the technology further within the university so that you have a very strong company that can be formed. We're certainly at UCT seeing increased interest in company formation, and it's certainly becoming a lot more sort of possible. I think the other thing is just in terms of sort of real high-tech companies, it takes special skills. It won't be your entrepreneur who's going to open up a coffee chain or whatever. With a lot of the technologies, you're dealing with all sorts of hurdles like regulatory hurdles and approvals that need to be obtained. So, I think that it's and there's a need to just sort of increase the pool of experienced entrepreneurs in that space. I think even within the sort of UCT spin-off stable, we're finding that a lot of the different CEOs and members of the different spin-off companies are actually helping our other companies in terms of starting up and watching out for various pitfalls. So it's great. A community is certainly developing around them.
Well, thanks to Andrew Baily, he's Intellectual Property Manager at the University of Cape Town, and Ralph van Niekerk is a patent attorney at Seidels Intellectual Property Attorneys.